Obviously, this is the manual for Silent Service 2, the sequel to Silent Service, released originally in 1990. They say, actual screen shown. And they're sort of bragging about the quality of their own graphics. Actually, in 1990, this was as good as it got. They're not really boasting. This is state of the art for 1990. I've always wanted this game, actually. It took me a long time to find something that would run on my computer, and now, of course, it's kind of made obsolete by many subsequent World War II submarine simulations, but reading this manual was really interesting, because this is maybe the best manual of any war game I've ever read. Tremendous amounts of history in it, a lot of moral debate about submarine warfare and warfare generally. And the Tench class, this might be one of the only World War II submarine simulators that has the Tench class. The Tench class were introduced at the very end of the war, but they're more often associated with the Korean War. Even though in Korea they used mostly Gatos and Balaos, because they were left over from World War II and had been upgraded. But the Tench was almost not used in World War II because it came so late. But it's cool that it's included. This all illustrates another point, that you can choose your class in this version of Silent Service, and you can go much further back because the S class were developed at the end of World War I. None of them were actually commissioned during World War I, but they almost were. The World War I classes that made it to World War II are not included, namely the O and the R class. If I were going to mod this game, I would add the O's and the R's, because the R's at least served, and the O's were used for training. They were the most unpleasant of the pig boats, though, so they were not very successful in combat. I don't even know if they scored any kills, actually. So then they show you, all the things you need to know to play the game. Here, if you look at your boat specifications, they give you this when you are issued your boat. You choose your class, but are not allowed to choose your specific boat, strangely enough. So, I think the Tang actually had 400, like I said in the previous video, 400-foot test depth, not 350, but we'll gloss over that for the moment. You have radar in this version of Silent Service, although not a snorkel. There are none of these. Even the Tench class are not given snorkels in this simulator, which I've always regretted, because it was one of the things I was hoping they would include in Silent Service 2. But in World War II, snorkels were more of a German thing. The U.S. Navy adopted them after the war, and pretty much all the World War II boats they kept got them eventually. So, more explanation of how the game works. Zoom out a little bit here. I'll scan down. And this is very, very detailed, and you can do a whole naval career in this version of Silent Service, not just one patrol. So you can do everything from a practice run to a whole career. So it's very versatile. They also tell you the dates that your bases actually operate. In the original Silent Service, you had all of your bases all the time, but in Silent Service 2, you choose the date that you start your patrol, and depending on the date that you start your patrol, or your career, that will determine what classes of sub you may try, and what bases you may operate out of. And you can start from the day of Pearl Harbor, actually, because the submarines of the Navy were deployed immediately, but they were deployed even faster than the B-17 bombers were. The first counterattack that you hear about was a group of, I don't know exactly how many, B-17 bombers. There was a whole movie made about that called Air Force, but the submarines departed for combat immediately. They have the schematic of a Gato class, which of course was the most common attack subclass in World War II in the U.S. Navy, and it's the one you're most likely to use in both Silent Service 2 and the original Silent Service. You can tell by looking at it, it's very, very similar to a Balau. I have a plastic model of the lionfish, and it's a lot like this. Gatos and Balaus are very close. But the Balau was a distinct class, not an improved Gato. And here they have a more detailed description of the classes. Again, they're calling the Gato improved, the Balau the improved Gato. But anyway, they explain the whole problem with U.S. torpedoes in World War II, that there were a lot of technical problems with them. There was an article in American Heritage of Invention and Technology magazine called Damn the Torpedoes, Why Ours Didn't Work in World War II, if you can look that up. Unfortunately, I don't remember the issue, and I don't have the index for that magazine in front of me, or the issue in question, but if you search for Damn the Torpedoes, Why Ours Didn't Work in World War II in American Heritage of Invention and Technology magazine, also called I&T, you'll be able to read a lot more about this. And in this version of Silent Service, you get a much wider variety of Japanese ships. Everything from a Yamato-class battleship down to small patrol craft like this one, and the merchant ships, which are more generic. This is the most interesting part of the manual, in my opinion, because no wargame manual I've ever read covers this topic. It says, war is perhaps the most unpleasant attribute of the human race. Historians can list literally thousands of wars. Causes and results are legion, the amount of death and suffering unimaginable. We Americans sometimes forget this because it's been 125 years since war has devastated our own land. Since then, we've always fought overseas. On the other hand, men, and a few women, are fascinated by warfare, by the extreme risks and sometimes world-shaking results. Young men are especially entranced by tales of adventure and bravery. Many microprose simulations deal with warfare. In a simulation, you can vicariously experience the thrills of warfare and the responsibilities of battlefield command without anyone getting hurt, much less killed. But always remember that the real thing is unimaginably horrible, full of pain and death. Simulations are deceiving because we edit out the unpleasant parts. And they put in a disclaimer about Japan's post-war commitment to more or less pacifism. I guess they're trying to do an anti-racist message there. But it's interesting that they include this disclaimer at all. I don't think I've ever read a manual for a war game that includes anything like this. I think that's very interesting. And they give some sources for reading, which, again, is very unusual. I've not actually read any of these. I've read one book on the trigger, which is one of the subs that you can use in Silent Service 2. Although, as I said, if you're assigned it randomly. You can't actually choose the trigger. You can choose the Gato class and hope that you get the trigger, but the odds of it are very slim because there are so many Gatos. Now, it looks as if Arnold Hendrick, rather than Sid Meier, wrote this manual. He's giving himself credit there. Maybe this will give us a little bit more information. So Arnold Hendrick was the head designer on Silent Service 2 rather than Sid Meier. But the sequels to Sid Meier's games are often handled by other developers to bring in new ideas.